Welcome back to the McCoy Leadership Podcast, elevating your impact through valuable insights and conversations about leadership. Welcome back to another episode of the McCoy Leadership Podcast. And today we have Cheryl Strauss Einhorn with us. And Cheryl has many years of experience in all kinds of different things, from investigative reporting to now being an author, has a new book coming out in the near future about AI and also has one coming out about decision making. Cheryl, welcome and thank you for taking time out of your day to spend with our listeners. Tell us a little bit about how you ended up where you are today.
Thank you so much for having me. Well, it's been a very unexpected journey. My background is in investigative journalism. I spent over a decade at the business magazine Barron's. And while I was there, I ended up specializing in what you might call the bearish company story. These are stories that take a skeptical look at a company's finances or their strategy. And when the stories came out, there's often a really outsized reaction. Because they were about publicly traded companies, sometimes the stock exchanges had to halt the shares from trading until they could have an orderly order flow. Sometimes regulators would get involved, like our Securities and Exchange Commission. Sometimes companies were raided by the FBI. About half a dozen companies went out of business after I asked questions about their operations. And for one company, after a series of articles, a CEO actually was sentenced to 10 years in jail. And as these stories came out, although journalism really does celebrate truth to power, what weighed heavily on me is that behind all of these stories are people. So it is not just somebody's investment account that could be at risk, but their retirement funds. Or if you worked at one of these companies and I was asking questions, you might be worried for your job, and so on. And so as I started to think about the broader impact of these stories, I wondered, how do I know that I'm telling stories that are true? And how do I know that I am marshaling the right evidence and that I'm evaluating and interpreting the data correctly? And that really led me on this journey about decision making. And at the time, there was a lot of new information coming out that we all have these mental mistakes, what we now think of as cognitive biases, these well-worn pathways that help us make many decisions quickly during the day, but that narrow our thinking and don't go away when we're solving for complex problems. And there was no way to actually counter and control for these. So I just thought, with my background in journalism, maybe I can put together a system for complex problem solving that will really help you control for and counter these mental mistakes so that we can expand our knowledge while we improve our judgment. And that became what I now call my area method. And it set me on a different pathway. Instead of staying at Barron's, I was invited to teach at Columbia, both at the business school and at the Graduate School of Journalism. And then I have written 3 books about decision making, 2 of them touching off my area method. And I now have a company called Decisive, where we do coaching and trainings to help people with complex problem solving.
I am curious. Well, to begin with, I got to say that as you started that and telling all of the, some of the things that happened to the companies that you did stories about, I wasn't sure I wanted to continue the interview. I didn't know what might happen here, but I'm okay now. I'm kidding. But thinking about those companies, I am curious, how many times did the companies not even know there was something maybe wrong or something happening that you uncovered? I mean, somebody there did, but I mean, overall as a company, they felt things were just chugging along great. And lo and behold, there's an issue behind the scenes. How many times did that type of interaction happen?
Yeah, I can only guess at something like that. I don't have any evidence. When there are very large companies, of course, there can be people who may not be involved in the activities that I'm questioning. But for a bunch of these companies, things were pretty complicated. And in order for them to try to tackle some of the issues that I was writing about, many people probably had knowledge that there was something that was going on that the company was working to solve or wasn't working to solve.
And the reason I ask that is I find often in talking with business owners, talking with clients, many times they know there's a problem. Even if they don't know what the problem is, they know there's a problem and they know there's something that needs to be solved. And what I'm getting at is it is possible the CEO doesn't know about the maintenance problems that are causing, a major customer delay on the floor, but they still know there's a delay and there's some problem, so go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is a problem that happens all the time. I was in a conversation recently about a new business proposal that didn't make a lot of sense. And that actually was going to be in a market that was really experiencing quite a downturn. And the people who were invited to this meeting, many of them didn't want to say anything. They didn't want to be the voice of skepticism. They were hoping that other people would surface some of the questions that should be investigated. And I do find that this is relatively common when you are in a meeting and a lot of people are there, that there is a lack of true comfort to be vulnerable and to voice your opinion.
So kind of right on top of that, how is it possible for someone to make a good decision if they don't have understanding and the trust and the vulnerability of all the people around them to be able to say, Mr. CEO or Mrs. CEO, I think you're wrong, and here's why I think you're wrong. How big of an impact does that make? I mean, I'm really even wondering in some of those bad situations, were bad decisions made just because nobody was willing to move forward to say, here's the issue. Here's what we have going on. How much of a role does that play in your decision-making method?
Well, my decision-making method is built on a collaborative backbone, and it really focuses on this idea that we never truly make a decision alone. Even if it's our decision and we have the ownership over it, there are always going to be other stakeholders who are impacted. And the successful execution of that decision is going to depend in part on the buy-in of those other stakeholders. But for the problem that we were talking about, that is why leadership and culture are so important. Because in order for people to really surface the problems, there has to be a way for that conversation to take place. And some environments don't feel comfortable to do that. And there's often also a disconnect between sort of the revenue generating side of the business and the administrative side of the business as well.
Gotcha. So now I'm also wondering, sorry, my mind is jumping around thinking about decision making, but so being able to have a place where the conversation can be held, that makes sense. That has to be a comfortable environment where people can talk, but also, and specifically thinking about your area method, which we'll get into, how many people just struggle to make a decision, period? They're not decision makers, but they're in a decision-making, position. And will your method help them as well?
So my newest book is called Problem Solver, and it focuses on the psychology of personal decision-making. And it puts forth that there are sort of 5 dominant ways that people make decisions. And there's no one right way. Each of them have beautiful strengths, and each of them have some limitations and some cognitive biases that get in the way. But among those 5, there are a few problem solver profiles, as I call them, that really struggle to make a decision, and two that are extremely decisive. So if you'd like, I can share a little bit about each of these problem solver profiles so you can really get a sense of which are the ones that find problem solving the most taxing for them.
Yeah, I would love to hear more about that because we had a guest on early on when we started the podcast, Gabby Boucher, which has a program out called The Purpose. I think it's called The Purpose Factor. And Gabby, if you're listening and I got that wrong, please don't get upset with me. But you can find it online, and it's an assessment that helps you find your purpose. So on air, she went through and kind of did a live version with me. And what she came back to was basically, I am the type of person that is great to be dropped in the middle of chaos, make decisions, and bring calm out of that, which is what I do for a living, right? I'm a consultant and leadership expert. And so I'm curious to hear how all of that kind of fits together and then how that might fit into DISC, which we use in our practice here. So I'd love to hear more about it.
Yeah, so the problem solver profiles are focused on decision making, which is only one aspect of personality. Personality is really a cocktail of things that tell you nothing about decision making per se, nor do they share with you how would you approach, interact, and build a relationship with someone. But decision making is about action. It's about the choices that we take that move us to our future. So that's something that is specific. So the problem solver profiles are, I gave them fun names because we think in language and we haven't had a lexicon until this work. They are the adventurer, the detective, the listener, the thinker, and the visionary. The adventurer is our most decisive decision maker. She is somebody who has a path forward identified that is internally generated, meaning she's got a very strong sense of intuition and gut feeling. And she really likes to be able to make a lot of decisions. And there's an underlying optimism bias to that, which I think is actually rather beautiful, which is if you take a decision and that decision starts to go awry, guess what? You always have the next decision ahead. And that gives her this lovely sense of confidence to continually move forward. The next problem solver profile is the detective, and I'm a detective. We are people who like to do research. We want to make a decision that has some underlying evidence that is not internally generated, but is often a number or some kind of data. And cognitive bias that is associated with that, a limitation, is confirmation bias. Because we are good at finding facts, we can find facts that supports a favored hypothesis, which isn't as good as looking for disconfirming evidence. You can have a lot of evidence for something, but if you have one piece of evidence that breaks that thesis, that decision isn't going to work out. The third problem solver profile is the listener. This is our cooperative, trusting, and collaborative decision maker. She is somebody who generally has a trusted group of advisors, and a limitation or bias for her could be the liking bias, where she can overweight information that comes from somebody that she has an affinity for. The listener is the problem solver profile that has the hardest time identifying her own inner voice. The fourth profile, and this is somebody who really has trouble with problem solving and decision making, sees their decisions as very weighty. And this is the archetype I call the thinker. The thinker is cautious and careful. They want to deeply understand their options. And this could have a frame blindness or a relativity bias where they too narrowly circumscribe the parameters of the decision as they weigh one option against the other. And for the fifth problem solver profile, this is what we call the visionary. This is somebody who can see the rainbows that we haven't seen yet. They really favor something that is original and creative, and a limitation for them can be a scarcity bias, where they overweight something that is unusual when something work a day. can be just as good. So what you see is each of these 5 profiles has different strengths. They're optimizing for different things. They think about speed differently. They think about data differently. They think about including other stakeholders differently. And what's beautiful about the profiles is if you can identify the profile of somebody with whom you're making a decision, you have a faster, better way to work with them because you know what they want from you. What kind of information do they want to hear? How do they want that delivered? And so I've thought of it almost as a trust accelerator. By using these profiles, you have a way to speak the language of the person with whom you need to make a decision.
That's interesting because, as that kind of fits into or elaborates on, I mean, the way I see it, all of these things, the DISC and your decision-making profiles and, the more we understand, I guess what I'm really drawing out of this is the more we understand about who we're dealing with, the better we can deal with them if we're willing to adapt to their style.
It doesn't have to be about adapting, because adapting is asking you to change, right? What it does have to do with is listening to that person so that you can identify what they're optimizing for and learn about their incentive structure. And then you're not sort of sublimating yourself. Right? You're still on equal footing, but you're able to share both information that's important to them as well as your own perspective. And I think oftentimes we come in stuck inside ourselves because we are. And so this gives you a window to have a more fulsome understanding of the fact that different people solve problems differently and that one is not better than the other. But we ultimately need to be able to make decisions well with other people when you have stakeholders involved.
Absolutely. It makes sense. I was just thinking, as you mentioned, listening, I often tell people that, how do you or I ask the question, how do you listen? And most people kind of look at you funny and say, well, with my ears, or they give you some answer of that nature. But I think it's so important, and I think it would apply here as well, is that we should always, when we're interacting with others, be listening with the intent to understand, not listening with the intent to respond. I think that's a valuable lesson in any of these aspects, that you're willing to listen to really understand. I think Stephen Covey said, seek first to understand before you seek to be understood. I think, is another way of putting that. So another thing that you said at the beginning of that I wanted to draw out was, and ask a question, a decision is something that helps you to move forward, or a decision will help you move from where you are today to that next step. So how important is it that you actually know where you want to go?
So that's an interesting question. My area method begins with asking people about their vision of success. It gives you an opportunity to time travel, because many people don't necessarily know exactly what they want from a decision. And so the vision of success question asks people, what has to happen in the outcome of the decision for you to know that it has succeeded for you? And so by time traveling over the decision, you're identifying what I call your critical concepts, the 1, 2, or 3 things that if they don't happen after the decision has been made, you would deem that decision has failed. Now you know just the few critical pieces that you need to deeply and creatively investigate to be able to solve for that vision of success. So I think it's really important to have an opportunity to ask yourself that question, because otherwise it's like the Alice in Wonderland anecdote about the Cheshire Cat. Well, where do you want to go? I don't know, Alice says. And the Cheshire Cat responds, well, then surely you will get there.
Yep. And I guess that was my kind of thinking through that, thinking about making a decision. Many times we see people that feel they're obligated to make a decision, but don't really know what the outcome is or what the desired outcome is. They just know that they need to make a decision one way or the other. At the same time, by doing that time travel and thinking about what that desired outcome, what you would like it to look like to be called success, isn't it possible that sometimes when we do arrive there that we realize our idea of success wasn't the correct idea? And what do we do in that case?
So that's an interesting question, right? Because success has a bit of a balance sheet effect or a photograph effect. It's a moment in time. You may think 3 months after the decision that it was a failure, and 6 months later think it's a great home run. So that is also why getting really clear on the success metrics can help you, because then you don't have an evolving hypothesis of what success is. And sometimes you're absolutely right. Sometimes you can have a decision where when you get there, you realize that you identified the wrong thing. And that's why keeping a decision journal, I think, is such a useful tool, because we all have the opportunity to learn from this vast data set of ourselves about when have we made a good decision and what can we learn from those decisions that we are not happy with, so that we can have less regret in the future.
So I was just getting ready to say, all right, let's talk about the area method and what exactly does that mean? But another question kind of hit me was, so what if we make a decision, we've done all of our homework, we've time traveled, we have our vision of success, but something happens. So I'm thinking, let's say for my business as a speaking, coaching and training business, maybe I decided in 2019 that to stand out, am never going to do virtual, and I'm going to only do live events because I can connect better with people. And that's my decision. No virtual ever. And I'm wildly successful. And maybe I've set that I'm going to do X number. And then 2020 happens and this thing called the coronavirus creeps into our life. And now, is that the right decision? And so something's happened outside of my control. Should our decisions be fluid? Or should we stick to it? And should I, at that point, say, nope, I said no virtual. If my business goes out of business, it goes out of business. Thoughts on that?
So that doesn't make any sense, right? We would love to think that decision-making is linear. Wouldn't that be nice?
It would be wonderful.
It's not, right? Decision-making is circular. It has to have a feedback loop. As you get new information, you have to integrate it and update and iterate your critical concepts and what you're looking at. That's the whole point of conducting research, right? Or making observations.
Now, wait a minute. This decision thing's starting to seem like work. I thought I just got to make a decision and that was it.
Well, sometimes that's true. And for some of the problem solver profiles, that can certainly be true, right? The visionary can see things that we can't see, and they can hold on to that vision. And the adventurer also feels very confident that they can continually move forward. But for the rest of us detectives, listeners, and thinkers, it's not quite as easy. Right? It is work. And the amount of energy that we expend on some decisions can be very costly or can make us really speed up on other decisions because we've simply run out of energy. We've exerted too much. I do want to note one other thing about the problem solver profiles. They are not prescriptive. They're not going to tell you what you're going to do tomorrow. They are comfortable habits and patterns of behavior. When you are in a perfunctory mode and you're going about your day, these are your defaults. But all of us have pieces of all 5 of the profiles. You may go to the supermarket as a visionary, but still be primarily a thinker, for example. So you can think of times and episodes where, as you learn about the profiles, you may want to develop some of the strengths that these other decision-making archetypes have, and you can try them on for small decisions, right? You could buy insurance as an adventurer, or you could go on a vacation as a listener, and you could check out how and where you can become more flexible and agile as a decision maker. And maybe that will also help you with conserving your energy and applying it most where you need it.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, these are things that we can learn and get better at and look at ways that we become a better well-rounded. So for instance, if you ask my wife, she would tell you that I am definitely not a visionary when I go to the supermarket, like you described. I go to the supermarket and I'm looking for meat, potatoes, bread, that's about it. And so can I learn to be more visionary in that circumstance when my wife says, go to the supermarket and buy supplies for a great dinner, that maybe I would broaden my horizons and look at seafood and look at other things? Can I learn to be better at that?
We can all learn to be more versatile and flexible and agile in our decision making. Absolutely. It takes some work and maybe a little discomfort, but discomfort's not bad. That's where the growth is. When you bump up against something and you're trying to be the listener in a conversation with your son about his homework, for example, you may really feel like you have to bite your tongue, but that is such a great indicator that this is a skill that maybe you want to work on more. Why is it so hard to just listen to him telling you why his room should be a mess or why his homework doesn't need to be completed? So I think when you come up against discomfort, if you think of it as a learning opportunity, that can really give you more of the growth mindset to think about what are the skills that the listener has and how can I continue to practice them? Because the more that we practice them, the more they can become our own habits and patterns as well.
So if I'm building a business and I'm putting together a team and conveniently I need 5 total people for my team, am I better to look for 5 adventurers or mix the 5 profiles together?
Great question. So when you have a lot of the same profile, that group is going to tend to lean more towards the blind spots and the limitations. If you are able to have the intellectual diversity of all 5 of the profiles, now you're going to have questions brought in from each of their vantage points. But here's what I would offer you. 2 thoughts. First, we can't see or hear intellectual diversity. I've worked with groups that seem to have people from all sorts of wonderful backgrounds, but they tended to be very heavily one problem solver profile. So when that happens, even if you haven't hired for all 5 profiles, the good news is by learning the profiles, you still can bring in questions from each of those vantage points, so you get an opportunity to examine decisions from all of the perspectives.
I got it. I out of that, for me, I think the most valuable thing is the idea that I can purposefully try to come up with questions that are going to be from different angles, and that will help me to arrive at a better decision. Now, we have said a couple of times, I want to go back to the area method. What exactly, in a nutshell, is the area method, and maybe a practical way that we can apply that?
Sure. So it's a structured system for decision making that, as we mentioned before, is meant to control for and counter our cognitive biases so that we expand our knowledge while improving our judgment. The letters of area are A for absolute information, which is up on the primary source information from the target of your decision. So if you're a leader and you're thinking about adding a new person to your team, it might be the specific roles and responsibilities that you want to hire for. Then the R in area is relative. It is sources that are related to that target but they put the decision in context. So this might be, what can I read and learn from experts about how this role and responsibilities that I'm considering works in other organizations? Or what might I be missing? And so therefore you get to learn from the outside world. What types of salaries are other companies offering when they hire for this particular type of role? And then the E in area is actually two things. It's exploration and exploitation. And I call them the twin engines of creativity, because exploration gets you beyond document-based sources, and it has you interviewing people to understand the difference between the map and the terrain. So these are the role and responsibilities that I've identified in absolute. This is how other people have crafted the role at their company, and what they pay people, that's relative. But in exploration, maybe you find out for people who are already in that role that you talk to, that's not actually what it looks like in today's world. AI has changed that, or whatever. The actual information is on the ground, experienced by the people doing the thing or working with the people in those roles and responsibilities. And then exploitation is a brand new part of decision making that I've added into the process, where you actually examine your evidence against your assumptions. And so here's where you're really controlling for encountering your cognitive biases. You might be using a data interpretation tool like a pro-con list, or you might be thinking about a scenario analysis, so you can examine the diagnosticity of the data you've collected. And then the final step, analysis, actually helps you put this information back together. It also asks you to think about failure. If this decision that you're thinking about fails, what happens? How does it fail? And in telling that failure story, you're identifying the vulnerabilities, and you have an opportunity to set up ways to protect against the failures that you've identified. So you strength test the execution before going forward and come to conviction. So you can see that area gives you an end-to-end process that really inserts strategic stops as you move from one perspective to the next, so that by the end, you really can have confidence and conviction that that decision can work well for you.
Got it. So I'm kind of curious, which is a good segue into the fact that you got a book coming out about AI. But how is AI and technology influencing decision making? And can you utilize AI maybe in ways that people wouldn't typically think about? Because a lot of people are using AI to search, find information, analyze data that already exists. But what went through my mind is, maybe I am an adventurer and I want to work on ways of being able to ask better questions that bring all the other four aspects into my decision making. Could I utilize AI to help me generate questions that are outside of my comfort area to utilize in that process?
These are all good questions. I think there is a lot of place to use AI in decision making. But right now, you ask it a question and it gives you an answer. And what that does is it bypasses the critical thinking and problem solving that we would normally do for ourselves. And it's giving you a crowdsourced answer, right? It's not giving you an answer based on your specific circumstances. So let's say that I'm thinking about buying a new car, and I ask it what's going to be the most energy efficient and car, and here's my budget. And it comes back and it tells me, for example, that I should buy a Prius. Well, I go out and I buy a Prius because, look, all these other people have done that. This is what AI is telling me, but I'm actually buying the car because I have a brand new driver. Now I've got a really lightweight car. So maybe I haven't shared with it that a brand new driver is going to be in it. What do I want to know about crash testing? What do I want to know about skidding in the snow? And so on. And so it's only going to respond to you based on what you input. So in using it for decision making, what my new book, which is called The Human Edge, Decision Making in an AI-Driven World, and it should come out towards the end of this year from Cornell University Press, is that there are sort of 8 critical steps in complex problem solving. And therefore, your decisions are only as good as your ability to sort of know and share with AI information about your decision related to those 8 things. So problem definition, motivation, context, research, stakeholders, biases, analysis, and then coming to conviction. And so if you don't share some of the information across these things with AI, you may get back an answer that's just not right for you. Now, with AI, the interesting thing is you can probe that answer. Why did you say that? Why are you suggesting the Prius? Is this true for people that live in Idaho? Or is the data set that you're giving me this information from largely from people in big cities that don't have a lot of snow, for example? And so you can use answers that are off target in a way that we might not feel comfortable questioning a human being, right? AI is not going to get surly with us, and it's not going to lose interest. And so that, I think, is a very interesting opportunity to use AI to also learn more about how we communicate our thinking.
I like it.
I think 2 different ways to sort of think about AI usage related to decision making.
So before we move into our rapid fire questions here at the end, I want to make sure everybody has an opportunity. Where can they find out more about you? Maybe they want to engage with you, or they want to find out more about the books you already have written. Where can they find all of that information?
Well, thank you so much. I hope that you'll all connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm Cheryl Strauss Einhorn. My website is Area Method, AREA method.com. And you'll find my books on Amazon and also on my website. My first book, Introducing Area for Personal and Professional Decision Making, is called Problem Solved. My second book deals with financial and investment decisions, and that is called Investing in Financial Research. My third book about the problem solver profiles is called Problem Solver, and the new book, as we mentioned, about AI is going to be called The Human Edge.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that, and we'll be sure to include that in the all that information in the show notes as well. So we like to end every episode, ask all of my guests the same 3 questions. The first question is really derived just from hundreds, if not thousands, of conversations and hearing things like the young generation doesn't have this, or with the kids coming out of high school today don't understand this. And so my question is, to leadership experts around the world, if we had the opportunity to magically put all the school administrators into one room and you had just a moment to give them one thing that they need to include as part of a student's career that would help to turn out a better, well-rounded, maybe more prepared for work, leadership, and all of the above, what would be that one thing?
Well, from my vantage point on the world, it's teaching decision making. We expect people to make decisions, and we are all the chief decider in our own lives, but we haven't really thought about decision making as a discipline. What does it mean to actually make a decision? What is involved? And if you can do that, then you can apply it to absolutely everything that you're making choices about. Friendship decisions, family decisions, homework decisions, executive functioning decisions, decisions about our passion and our futures.
Awesome. And the second question is, throughout your career, what has been your go-to book that you've continually went back to get good insight out of?
I love the book, The Art of Learning. It's by Josh Waitzkin, who is a chess champion, and he really breaks down learning into what he calls small circles. In my teaching at Columbia, I made this book mandatory to everybody. I think that knowing how to learn what is actually involved is a real gift that you, again, can apply personally and professionally.
Awesome. And thank you for that. And the last question, which I'm anxious to know what the answer to this is, given the conversation so far, what today in the ever-changing world of technology is your favorite software, app, gadget, or thing that you find useful today?
Oh, my favorite is Libby. It is the library app.
Yes.
Because I hear about books or I read about something and I can go on Libby and I can put myself on the wait list to borrow it. And then things come up all year long that I hadn't really thought about. And I have these treasures waiting for me to share the voices and wisdom of other people.
Awesome. I love that. I use the Libby app as well. That's one of my favorite things in the world. Free books and free information. How can you beat that?
Absolutely.
Well, Cheryl, thank you so much for joining us. It has been so much fun. I've enjoyed the conversation. And maybe when this new book comes out at the end of the year, maybe we can get you on and we can do a whole session about the new book. But thank you.
I would love that. Thank you so much.
And for our listeners, if you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to check out some past episodes and don't forget to follow us on whatever platform you're listening so that you get alerts when the new episodes come out each week. Until next time, we appreciate all of you.